For my 32nd birthday, I rented a stunning glass front lake house, spent $800 stocking the fridge with premium ribe eyes, and sent invites weeks in advance. No one came. As I sat alone in the dark, my phone buzzed. My sister had just posted a picture of my entire family toasting champagne at a luxury resort in the Hamptons. The caption read, "Family weekend vibes." I did not shed a single tear. I simply opened my banking app, stopped paying my parents' mortgage, canceled my father's truck lease, and froze the massive business line of credit. They all conveniently forgot I co-signed. That night, my mother texted to ask if my bank was having an error. I replied, "No error." I just finally took the hint. If you have ever been the scapegoat who pays the bills while the golden child gets the glory, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe because you are going to want to hear how I turned their luxury vacation into their worst financial nightmare. My name is Clara and I am 32 years old. The sun was just beginning to dip below the treeing in upstate New York. Casting long mocking shadows across the massive mahogany dining table I had painstakingly set for 5 people. I had arranged the expensive silverware, perfectly poured the water glasses, and prepared a beautiful spread of food that was now growing cold. DC. I was a senior wealth manager at a top-tier financial firm in Manhattan, working grueling 80-hour weeks in a highly competitive and high-stakes environment. This weekend was supposed to be my rare escape from the city, a chance to breathe clean air and celebrate my birthday with the people who mattered most. Instead, the silence in the sprawling 4-bedroom house was absolutely deafening. I sat perfectly still at the head of the empty table, sipping a glass of vintage Cabernet. I had spent the last 3 hours making excuses for them in my head. Maybe traffic out of the city was terrible. Maybe they had taken a wrong turn. Then my phone illuminated the dim room. It was not a belated birthday wish. It was not a frantic apology text claiming they had a flat tire on the highway. It was an Instagram notification. My younger sister Brittany had just posted a carousel of photos. The location tag was a notoriously expensive luxury resort in the Hamptons. The first photo showed Brittany, who was 29, glowing in a designer sundress and holding up a crystal champagne flute. Standing right next to her was her husband Jamal, proudly flashing a brand new diamond-encrusted Rolex to the camera. Jamal was a 31-year-old African-American man who confidently referred to himself as a crypto investor and lifestyle influencer, despite the fact that his own car had been quietly repossessed just 2 years ago. And flanking them beaming with the kind of intense, unconditional pride they reserved exclusively for their golden child were my parents Patricia and Richard. The caption beneath the photo felt like a physical blow. Surprise Hamptons weekend, because family is priority number 1. Blessed to have a husband and parents who know how to treat a CEO right. I stared at the glowing screen, my heart beating a slow and steady rhythm against my ribs. The faces of the people who shared my blood smiled back at me, entirely unbothered by the fact that they were supposed to be sitting across from me right now. They had always told me I was boring, that I was just a rigid workaholic who could not keep a relationship, and that I lacked Brittany's brilliant creative genius. Yet my boring life was the invisible steel spine holding up their entire wealthy facade. As I sat there in the fading light, the financial math of my family dynamic played out in my head like a cruel and undeniable spreadsheet. Every single month, without fail, $800 was auto-drafted from my personal checking account to pay the mortgage on Patricia and Richard's pristine suburban home. Why did I pay it? Because 3 years ago, my father's reckless investments nearly put them on the street, and I stepped in to save them from losing everything. Every month, $850 left my account to pay the lease on Richard's beloved Ford F-150 truck, simply because a man of his self-perceived stature could not possibly be seen driving a used sedan. And then there was Brittany, my supposedly brilliant CEO sister. 2 years ago, she and Jamal came to me with a tearful, desperate pitch for her new boutique PR agency. They needed capital to launch. Because my parents had already ruined their own credit scores, they cornered me and begged me to co-sign a $150,000 business line of credit for them. I remember Patricia pleading with me, her eyes brimming with fake tears, telling me that I should not be selfish with my corporate success while my sister was trying to build her dreams. I had signed the paperwork. I had literally bought them their house, their truck, and their business. And in return for carrying the weight of their entire existence on my shoulders, I was not even worth a text message on my birthday. I did not throw my wine glass at the wall. I did not call them screaming and crying about how unfair it was. I simply opened my laptop. Being a wealth manager teaches you one very important rule about life. Money is power, and emotion is a terrible liability. It was time to cut the power. I logged into my primary banking portal and navigated to the recurring transfers tab. There it was on the screen. Patricia and Richard mortgage $2,800. I did not hesitate for even a fraction of a second. I clicked the button to cancel the autopay. A green checkmark appeared on the screen confirming the success. Next, I found the autodraft for the Ford F-150 lease. I canceled that autopay as well. Another green checkmark. Then, I logged into the commercial banking portal, where I was listed as the primary guarantor for Brittany's PR agency line of credit. I navigated to the deep security settings of the account. With 3 simple clicks, I locked the account entirely and initiated a hard freeze on the credit line, citing a guarantor review for suspicious activity. The available balance instantly dropped from tens of thousands of dollars down to an absolute zero. I closed the laptop, poured myself another generous glass of wine, and finally cut into the expensive ribeye steak I had cooked for myself. It tasted like absolute freedom. I spent the rest of my weekend enjoying the beautiful lake house, exactly as I intended, in total and uninterrupted peace. I kayaked on the quiet water early in the morning, read a good book on the sun-drenched deck, and ignored my phone completely. I knew the fallout would not happen immediately, because it was a long weekend and the banks were closed. The heavy hammer would not drop until the automated systems tried to process their luxurious lives on Monday morning. And I was more than ready to watch it fall. Monday arrived with a torrential downpour lashing against the floor, 2 ceiling windows of my Manhattan apartment. I was already at my desk by 7 in the morning, nursing a black coffee and reviewing my client portfolios. I felt incredibly centered. The anxiety that usually plagued me after a family slight was completely gone, replaced by a clinical detachment. I knew exactly what was coming. At precisely 9:14 in the morning, my phone screen lit up. It was a text message from Patricia. It did not start with a belated happy birthday. It did not ask if I had made it back safely from the lake house. It was a direct demanding directive. Clara, did something happen with your bank account? The mortgage autopay failed this morning. Your father's truck payment bounced too. Call the bank and fix it immediately. We do not want to be hit with any late fees. I stared at the message, marveling at the sheer entitlement. She assumed it was a bank error because the idea that I would intentionally cut them off was inconceivable to her. I had always been the reliable, obedient wallet. I set my phone and typed my reply with steady fingers. No bank errors, Mom. I canceled the payments permanently. I finally took the hint. Hope the Hamptons were worth it. I hit send. For exactly 2 minutes, there was absolute digital silence. I could picture Patricia staring at her screen in her pristine suburban kitchen, the gears slowly turning in her head as she realized her financial safety net had just evaporated. Then, the dam broke. My phone began to vibrate violently across my mahogany desk. Patricia called back-to-back 4 times. I watched her contact photo flash on the screen, hit decline each time, and place the device face down. The panoramic view of the city suddenly looked a lot brighter. By noon, the family group chat, a chat I had been practically invisible in for months, was exploding. Notifications flooded my locked screen in a relentless wave of panic and gaslighting. I finally picked it up to read the incoming barrage. Patricia wrote, "Clara Marie, you need to answer your phone right now. This is incredibly petty." It was a simple misunderstanding about the schedule. "We thought your lake house trip was next weekend. Do not act like a child." It was a blatant lie. I had sent a digital calendar invite that Patricia herself had explicitly accepted weeks ago. Before I could even process the audacity of her excuse, Richard chimed in. "You are throwing a temper tantrum over a birthday, grow up." "Clara, You are putting your mother and me in a terrible financial position. Turn the payments back on today. We will take you out to dinner next week to make up for the confusion. A dinner they would undoubtedly expect me to pay for using the very credit card they were currently panicking about. Then came Jamal. My brother-in-law had always possessed an astonishing level of unearned arrogance. Whenever we were in the same room, he made sure to talk over me constantly, mansplaining basic financial concepts to me, a literal wealth manager, simply because he had watched a few internet videos about cryptocurrency. Yo, Clara, Jamal texted, his tone dripping with condescension. This is super unprofessional. You are letting your personal feelings mess with our family business. Brittany tried to run the corporate card for our vendor lunch in the Hamptons, and it declined. You froze the credit line. Turn it back on right now. We have a massive public relations campaign launching today, and we need that liquidity immediately. Do not be jealous just because Brittany and I are out here winning. The audacity was breathtaking. They had used the commercial credit line, the exact one I legally guaranteed with my own hard-earned assets, to pay for their luxury vacation while standing me up on my birthday. Daisier. And he had the nerve to call me jealous. I leaned back in my leather chair, cracked my knuckles, and typed my response to the group chat. My memory is perfectly fine. The calendar invite was for this past weekend. As for the finances, I am no longer funding your lifestyle. Dad, you have 15 days before the truck lease goes into default. Mom, the mortgage is your responsibility now. Jamal, the business line of credit will remain frozen indefinitely until I conduct a full audit of the expenses. Do not ask me to unlock it again. I silenced the group chat. I knew exactly how they operated. When their demands failed, they would pivot to playing the victim. But my threat to audit the business account was not an empty bluff. As the guarantor of that $150,000 line of credit, I had full legal access to the transaction history. I had just never looked at it because I had made the foolish mistake of trusting my own sister. I logged back into the commercial banking portal. I downloaded the past 24 months of statements for Brittany's boutique agency into a massive spreadsheet. What I found over the next hour made my blood run absolutely cold. When Brittany had pitched me this business venture, she confidently claimed she had 5 solid clients lined up. Local retail boutiques, a small technology startup, and a commercial real estate firm. I sorted the spreadsheet by incoming revenue. Month 1 showed zeros. Month 2 showed zeros. Month 6 showed zeros. In 2 entire years of operation, my sister's agency had not generated a single dollar of legitimate client revenue. The only money entering that account was the cash being frantically drawn from the credit line I had guaranteed. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sorted the data by outgoing expenses. If there were no clients, where had $150, $1,000 gone? The itemized list was a masterclass in parasitic behavior. There were thousands of dollars dropped at luxury retailers. There were massive charges for high-end restaurants and exclusive spa treatments. But the most alarming transactions were the wire transfers. Every single month, large sums ranging from $4,000 to $8,000 were wired out to a third-party payment processor. I recognized the routing data instantly. It was a well-known offshore cryptocurrency exchange platform, Jamal. He had been draining the business credit line to fund his influencer lifestyle, gambling away money with my name attached to it. And then I found the transaction from 4 days ago. $12,500 charged to the luxury resort in the Hamptons. They had literally used my credit to fund the vacation they took instead of coming to my birthday. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was a devastating financial liability. If they defaulted on this, the bank would come after me. They would seize my assets and garnish my wages. My family was not just ignoring. They were actively digging a grave for my future to fund their present. I needed to call my lawyer immediately to protect myself, before this escalated into a federal issue. Before I could even pick up my phone to dial my attorney, the screen illuminated with an entirely new wave of incoming messages. The initial shock of the frozen accounts had clearly worn off, leaving behind a frantic, vicious desperation. They had realized I was not making an empty threat. The financial pipeline they had relied on for years was sealed shut, and they were trapped at a luxury resort with a declined corporate card. My father was the first to escalate the situation. Richard sent a massive paragraph abandoning any pretense of a simple misunderstanding. His words were designed to make me feel small, a tactic he had perfected over 3 decades. Clara, you are acting like a spoiled, ungrateful brat. I have worked my entire life to provide for this family, and the one time we ask for a little support. Muddy, you pull a stunt like this. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is for a man of my standing to have an auto-pay rejected? You are humiliating your mother and me. Unfreeze the business account immediately and reinstate the mortgage payment. We can talk about your hurt feelings when we get back, but you will not hold our finances hostage. The gaslighting was almost poetic in its predictability. He was the one driving a truck paid for by his daughter, living in a house secured by my income. Yet, he positioned himself as the hard-working provider, being victimized by a greedy child. I took a slow breath, letting the anger wash over me, and then compartmentalizing it. Patricia chimed in exactly 10 seconds later, utilizing her favorite weapon, guilt. How can you do this to your own sister? Brittany cried in the hotel lobby when the front desk manager told her the card was declined. She is under an immense amount of stress, trying to run a successful agency. 3. You have always been so jealous of her, Clara. I thought you had outgrown this sibling rivalry. But clearly, you are just trying to sabotage her success because you are unhappy with your own life. We sacrificed everything to raise you. We gave you a beautiful childhood. This is how you repay us. By destroying your sister's livelihood over a birthday dinner. A beautiful childhood. The phrase echoed in my mind. My beautiful childhood consisted of watching them pour every resource into Brittany's dance lessons, Brittany's tutoring, and Brittany's college tuition while I worked shifts at a local diner to pay for my own textbooks. I was the reliable workhorse. She was the show pony. Then Jamal entered the chat. My brother-in-law never missed an opportunity to exert his unearned authority. He fancied himself the patriarch of our generation. Despite contributing absolutely nothing of value to society, his message was a masterclass in condescending manipulation, thinly veiled as spiritual guidance. Listen to me very carefully, Clara. Family is about forgiveness and grace. We all fall short sometimes, and maybe we drop the ball on your birthday. We own that. But you are letting your toxic independence ruin a beautiful family bond. As a man who understands wealth generation, I am telling you that you are making a massive mistake. My business requires immediate liquidity today. I have leveraged positions that need capital right now. If you do not unfreeze that line of credit, you will be personally responsible for destroying a 6-figure growth opportunity. Be the bigger person. Unlock the card. We forgive you for lashing out. I read Jamal's message twice. He forgave me. He was gambling my money on offshore cryptocurrency exchanges, using my credit to fund a luxury vacation, and he had the absolute audacity to offer me his forgiveness for freezing my own account. Furthermore, his mention of leveraged positions and a need for immediate liquidity confirmed exactly what I had suspected from the bank statements. He was facing a massive margin call on his crypto trades. The market had dipped over the weekend, and his broker was demanding cash to cover the shortfall. He was completely desperate. I placed my hands flat on my desk. The time for emotional reactions was over. I was a senior wealth manager. I handled hostile takeovers and aggressive corporate restructuring for a living. It was time to treat my family exactly like a hostile entity. I opened the group chat and typed my response. I did not use exclamation points. I did not express hurt or anger. I established a steel boundary. Dad, your financial standing is a direct result of your own choices. My money is no longer available to subsidize your ego. Mom, comparing me to Brittany will not pay your mortgage. Jamal, I am fully aware of what a margin call looks like. You are not experiencing a liquidity issue for a public relations campaign. You are losing money on unregulated crypto exchanges, and you expected to use my credit line to cover your bad bets. I paused, ensuring every word was deliberate. The mortgage autopay is permanently canceled. The truck lease autopay is permanently canceled. The business line of credit will remain frozen. I am initiating a formal separation as the guarantor on the agency account. You have until the end of the billing cycle to secure alternative financing. If you attempt to contact my employer, show up at my apartment, or harass me further, my attorney will issue a cease and desist order. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. I hit send. I knew that message would act like a grenade in the middle of their luxury resort suite. I had stripped away their excuses, exposed Jamal's financial incompetence, and removed their access to my capital in one clean stroke. I blocked all 3 of their phone numbers temporarily, needing to guarantee my own peace of mind, while I plotted my next legal move. I picked up my phone to finally call David, my attorney, to discuss the offshore wire transfers I had found in the audit. But before I could navigate to his contact card, a sharp ping echoed from my desktop computer. A priority email notification slid into the top right corner of my monitor. It was an automated security alert from Experian, my personal credit monitoring service. The subject line was highlighted in stark red text. Alert. New hard inquiry on your credit profile. Status approved. Commercial line of credit limit increase. My hand hovered over the mouse. My pulse began to race, drumming a frantic beat against my eardrums. I had not applied for any credit increases. I had not signed any authorization forms. I clicked the link, logging into the Secure Credit Bureau portal with trembling fingers. The detailed report loaded on the screen, and the air was violently sucked out of my lungs. The game had just changed completely. 2 weeks ago, precisely 14 days before my disastrous birthday weekend, an application had been submitted to the commercial lending division of my bank. The request was unambiguous. Brittany's boutique agency was petitioning to raise its revolving credit line from $150,000 to a staggering $250,000, because my impeccable financial standing was anchored to the account. As the primary guarantor, the bank's automated underwriting system had fast-tracked the approval. The funds had been cleared. 100,000 new dollars had been made available to people who despised me. I sat frozen in my ergonomic office chair. The rain continued to batter the glass behind me, but the sound faded into white noise. I am a professional who manages wealth portfolios for individuals whose net worth exceeds the gross domestic product of small island nations. I know banking regulations better than I know my own reflection. A credit limit increase of this specific magnitude is not a casual administrative adjustment. It cannot be done with a simple phone call or a verbal request over the customer service line. It requires extensive documentation. It requires the primary guarantor to explicitly authorize the expansion of liability. It requires a signature. My hands moved across the keyboard with a frantic, terrifying precision. I bypassed the standard banking interface and accessed the deep document repository for the commercial account. Every loan agreement, every addendum, and every digital verification certificate associated with Brittany's business was stored in this secure archive. I located the file dated 2 weeks prior. The document title read Commercial Line Extension Agreement. I clicked download. The file opened on my secondary monitor. I read through the standard boilerplate text, my eyes scanning the heavily legal paragraphs detailing interest rates, repayment terms, and default liabilities. My heart pounded a harsh rhythm against my sternum. I scrolled past the terms and conditions, moving directly to the final page where the execution signatures were housed. There, sitting stark in black against the glowing white screen, was my name, Clara Collins, rendered in a cursive digital font that I had never selected. Attached to that signature was an IP address, a timestamp, and a digital certificate of authenticity. Someone had forged my electronic signature. My mind raced to process the gravity of what I was looking at. Identity theft is a serious offense, but forging a signature on a commercial loan document crosses the threshold into federal wire fraud. It is a felony. I stared at the forged name, trying to understand how Brittany could have bypassed the bank's rigorous security protocols. To execute a digital signature on a high-yield commercial addendum without the guarantor physically present in a branch, the banking system requires a stringent verification process. It demands secondary authentication. It requires witnesses to legally attest to the identity of the signer. I scrolled down just a fraction of an inch further. The air in my office suddenly felt freezing cold. Beneath my forged signature were the mandatory witness verification lines. These were the individuals who had supposedly watched me sign this document, who had legally sworn to the bank that Clara Collins was present, consenting and fully aware of the liability she was undertaking. Witness 1, Patricia Collins. Witness 2, Richard Collins. My own parents. My mother and father had not just enabled my sister's financial irresponsibility. They had not just turned a blind eye to Jamal's offshore gambling. They had actively, willingly, and legally conspired to commit a federal crime against their own daughter. They had served as the verifying witnesses to a forgery that bound me to $250,000 in debt. I pushed my chair away from the desk. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray, rain-soaked expanse of Manhattan. The betrayal was so absolute, so structurally sound in its malice that it transcended normal anger. When a family member forgets your birthday, it is a personal slight. When they insult your lifestyle, it is emotional abuse. But when your own parents sit in front of a computer screen and legally verify a forged signature to saddle you with crippling debt, so their golden child can maintain a fake millionaire lifestyle, it is a declaration of war. They had weaponized my identity. They viewed me not as a human being, not as a daughter, but as a host body to be drained. They had known they were committing a crime. Patricia and Richard were not ignorant people. They knew exactly what a witness signature entailed. They had willingly committed perjury and fraud because preserving Brittany's fragile ego and Jamal's delusional crypto investments was vastly more important to them than my financial survival. If I defaulted on this massive account, my entire career would be immediately over. The regulatory bodies governing my profession would revoke my licenses. I would lose my job, my apartment, and everything I had spent the last decade building. My parents knew this. They simply did not care. A sharp, clear focus settled over me. The emotional wounds that had plagued me for 32 years finally scarred over, hardening into an impenetrable armor. I walked back to my desk and picked up my phone. I dialed the direct cell phone number of my attorney, David. He picked up on the second ring. "David," I said, my voice eerily calm and entirely devoid of any residual panic. "I need you to pull the guarantor paperwork for the commercial line of credit I co-signed 2 years ago. My sister and her husband are not just squandering money. They are committing federal fraud. Send it over immediately," David replied, his tone instantly matching my professional severity. "Do they know you are looking into it? Have you mentioned the limit increase to them?" "I just froze the card this morning," I explained, keeping my words precise. "They are panicking because they cannot pay their hotel bill in the Hamptons." "Keep it frozen," David advised, his voice taking on the sharp tactical edge I usually reserved for hostile corporate takeovers. "Do not let them know you have seen the forged addendum. Let them believe this is still just a family dispute over a locked credit card. I will draft the fraud alert for the bank's legal department. We move when we are fully loaded." I agreed and ended the call, placing my phone deep inside my bottom desk drawer. I did not want to see any more notifications. I did not want to read Patricia's manipulative texts or Jamal's ridiculous posturing threats. I needed total absolute focus. The rain continued to pound against the thick glass of my office window, blurring the Manhattan skyline into a gray wash. Inside, the only light came from the harsh glow of my dual monitors. As a senior wealth manager, my entire career is built on forensic financial analysis. I dissect complex corporate structures, identify hidden liabilities, and track untraceable assets for a living. My family thought I was just a boring number cruncher sitting at a desk. They were about to learn exactly what a forensic financial audit looks like when it is weaponized by someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose. I turned my attention back to the commercial banking portal. Earlier, I had done a quick skim of the incoming revenue and found it to be non-existent. Now, it was time to tear the entity apart piece by piece. Brittany had named her company Ascendancy Public Relations. When she pitched the idea to me and my parents in our childhood living room 2 years ago, she had a glossy, professionally bound presentation. She spoke passionately about disruptive marketing brand synergy and targeting high-net-worth demographics. Patricia had beamed with pride, wiping tears from her eyes. Richard had clapped her on the shoulder. They told me I needed to fund her genius, framing it as my familial duty to support real ambition. I pulled up the state business registry on my left monitor to verify her corporate filings, while keeping the bank statements open on my right. I initiated a deep data export, pulling every single transaction routing number and merchant category code associated with Ascendancy Public Relations since its inception. I dumped the raw data into my financial modeling software. I ran a standard pivot table to isolate all inbound cash flows. The screen loaded instantly. The total inbound revenue from external sources was exactly zero. There were no wire transfers from tech startups paying for consulting retainers. There were no process checks from local boutiques needing rebranding. There were no payment gateway deposits from digital marketing campaigns. The only money that had ever entered the operating account was the initial $150,000 credit draw and the newly stolen $100,000 limit increase that they had forged my name to obtain. Brittany was not running a failing business. She was running a ghost ship. The company had no employees, no payroll taxes, no independent contractors, and no client acquisition costs. It existed entirely as a sophisticated funnel to convert my pristine credit into their untraceable cash. I decided to cross-reference her public social media accounts with the bank statements to build an undeniable timeline of their fraud. I opened her Instagram page, which was public and boasting 20,000 clearly purchased followers. I scrolled back to a post from 8 months ago. The picture showed Brittany and Patricia sitting at a corner table at a Michelin-starred restaurant in the city. The caption read, "Power lunch with my biggest investor plotting the next quarter strategy. Always hustling." I checked the bank statement for that exact date. There was a charge for $840 at that specific restaurant, categorized under the merchant code for business meals. The investor was our mother. The strategy session was them eating imported oysters on my dime. I found another post this time from Jamal. He was standing in front of a sleek private jet on a sunny tarmac wearing a tailored suit and holding a leather briefcase. Through the caption read, "We up to Miami to close a major crypto partnership. The grinding never stops." I searched the transaction history around that specific date. There was a charge for $3,000 to a private aviation photo studio, a place where fake influencers rent a grounded, decommissioned jet by the hour to take fraudulent wealth photos. The reel following that charge was a $5,000 luxury hotel booking in South Beach, Miami. All of it was paid for by Ascendancy Public Relations. I categorized the expenses one by one. The software quickly generated a pie chart of their relentless theft. 40% of the funds had been wired offshore to Jamal's cryptocurrency gambling accounts. 30% had gone to luxury travel, high-end dining, and resort stays for Brittany, Jamal, and my parents. 20% was spent on designer clothing, luxury car rentals, and high-end beauty treatments. The remaining 10% was burned on minimum monthly payments to the credit line itself. A desperate attempt to keep the account in good standing, so the bank would not shut down their gravy train. I sat back and looked at the pie chart glowing on my screen. The sheer scale of the deception was dizzying. For 2 years, my mother had relentlessly bragged to her country club friends about Brittany's thriving business. She had constantly reminded me that I should try to be more like my sister, more ambitious, more creative, more willing to take risks. My father had praised Jamal's financial acumen, comparing my steady, reliable income to Jamal's supposed millionaire lifestyle. They had built an entire alternative reality, an elaborate stage play of wealth and success. And they had forced me to finance the production while keeping me locked outside the theater. The strange, absolute sense of peace washed over me. When you are the family scapegoat, you spend your entire life wondering what is wrong with you. You analyze every interaction, trying to figure out why your best is never good enough, why your achievements are ignored, and why your personal boundaries are treated as violent insults. You internalize the blame, but looking at the cold, hard numbers on my screen, the truth was undeniable. There was nothing wrong with me. I was dealing with parasites. My family was not just toxic. They were a coordinated criminal enterprise operating under the guise of familial love. They had drained the initial credit line dry. They had forged my signature and committed federal fraud to steal another $100,000 because their fake lifestyle was entirely unsustainable. And now they were stranded in the Hamptons with a frozen card, furious that their personal automated teller machine had finally shut down. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. I grabbed my favorite fountain pen. I did not just have bank statements anymore. I had a fully mapped forensic audit of a federal wire fraud conspiracy. The auditor had awakened, and I was going to tear their world apart dollar by dollar. I began cross-referencing the data sets on my dual monitors with ruthless precision. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing complex queries to track every single cent that had bled out of the business line of credit. I needed a complete, irrefutable paper trail. If they wanted to play games with federal wire fraud, I was going to hand the authorities a fully assembled puzzle. I started with the most recent transactions, the ones that had triggered my initial freeze on the account. The $1,500 charge to the luxury resort in the Hamptons was not an isolated incident of lifestyle funding. As I dug deeper into the merchant category codes, I found a sickening pattern of systemic financial abuse. Patricia and Richard were supposedly living on a fixed retirement income after my father's terrible investments nearly bankrupted them 3 years ago. Yet, the commercial credit card statements showed recurring charges at high-end grocery stores, luxury car detailing services, and expensive suburban country clubs. I found a charge for $3.200 at an exclusive boutique day spa in Boston, dated exactly 2 months ago. I cross-referenced the transaction date with Brittany's public social media profiles. It matched perfectly with a photo showing my mother and sister getting matching gold leaf facials. The caption read, "Treating ourselves after closing a massive corporate account." There was no account. There were no clients. It was my money paying for their hot stone massages, while I sat in my Manhattan office working through the weekend to ensure my own bills were paid. My attention then shifted to the jewelry. In the photograph Brittany had posted from the Hamptons, Jamal was proudly showing off a diamond-encrusted Rolex. A timepiece of that caliber does not come cheap, and it certainly does not materialize out of thin air for a man whose own vehicle had been quietly repossessed by the bank just 2 years prior. I ran a targeted search through the spreadsheet for high-value retail transactions. It took less than a minute to find the exact match. 6 months ago, there was a single point-of-sale transaction at an authorized luxury watch dealer in Manhattan for $28,500. The line item was brazenly categorized in their accounting software as a client retention and acquisition expense. I pulled up Jamal's social media profile from that exact week. Sure enough, he had posted a highly edited video of himself wearing the watch, standing right outside the dealership. He had looked directly into the camera and delivered a lengthy motivational speech about grinding, hustling, and the ultimate rewards of being a self-made entrepreneur. The hypocrisy made my stomach turn. He was not a hustler. He was a thief wearing stolen gold on his wrist, parading around the internet on my credit. But the spa days and luxury watches were just the surface-level grift. The truly massive financial hemorrhage was occurring in the offshore wire transfers. I isolated the outgoing wires and calculated the total sum. Over the course of 24 months, Jamal had funneled exactly $75 Susan to a digital currency exchange based entirely outside of the United States. I am a wealth manager. I understand the intricate mechanics of decentralized finance, and I know exactly what it looks like when someone is drowning in bad trades. Jamal was not building a diversified corporate portfolio for the agency. He was engaging in high-risk, highly leveraged cryptocurrency day trading. When you trade on margin, you borrow money from the broker to make much larger bets than your capital allows. If the market moves against your position, the broker issues a margin call, demanding that you immediately deposit more cash into the account to cover the potential losses. If you do not comply, they liquidate your positions entirely, wiping you out. Jamal had been losing consistently. Every time the market dipped, he panicked and wired more money from my credit line to cover his margin calls. He was treating the commercial account like a bottomless casino chip dispenser. And recently, the cryptocurrency market had experienced a massive downward correction. I looked at the specific dates of the largest offshore wire transfers. They perfectly aligned with major drops in the crypto market over the past few weeks. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with horrifying clarity. Jamal was facing total liquidation of his assets. The initial $150 Sauzenzin was completely exhausted, bled dry by vacations watches and terrible financial bets. He needed a massive injection of cash just to maintain his failing positions, which fully explained the frantic, desperate tone in his text messages to me earlier that morning. It also explained why my family had crossed the line from simple financial exploitation into federal crime. They had forged my signature to increase the limit by another $100,000 because Jamal's broker was calling in his debts, and they had no other way to pay. I printed the transaction logs and laid them out across my desk. The physical paper made the betrayal feel even more tangible. My parents had co-signed this disaster. They had watched Jamal drain a commercial account to buy watches and gamble online. They had enjoyed expensive dinners and resort vacations funded by my stolen credit. And when the money finally ran dry, instead of holding their son-in-law accountable, they had turned around and sacrificed me. They had legally verified a forged document to force me into an additional $100,000 of liability. I gathered the printed statements, the social media screenshots, and the financial models I had generated. I placed them neatly into a red manila folder. This was no longer just a defensive maneuver. I was compiling a prosecution packet. The bank's fraud department would need evidence, but more importantly, the federal authorities would require a clear financial narrative. I had successfully traced every stolen dollar from the moment it left the account to the moment it was wasted on their fake millionaire lifestyle. The auditing phase was complete. Now, I needed to solidify the evidence of the forgery itself before they realized the extent of their exposure and tried to cover their digital tracks. I reached for my keyboard again, ready to hunt down the exact audit trail of the document they used to steal my identity. I navigated back to the secure document repository in my banking portal. I located the PDF containing the commercial line extension agreement. With a few swift clicks, I extracted the embedded audit trail and displayed it on my right monitor. I needed to see exactly how they had bypassed the bank's rigorous security regulations. The first detail that jumped out at me was the IP address associated with the primary guarantor signature, my forged signature. I copied the string of numbers and ran it through a basic geolocation tool. The map instantly zoomed in on a specific residential block in a wealthy Connecticut suburb. It was the exact address of Patricia and Richard's 4-bedroom colonial home, the house I had been paying the mortgage on for 3 years. They had not hired a hacker. They had not used a sophisticated proxy server to mask their location. They had sat at the oak desk in my father's home office, logged onto their residential internet network, and brazenly committed identity theft from the comfort of the house I funded. But a matching IP address was only a circumstantial evidence. I needed the absolute smoking gun. I scrolled further down the certificate to examine the authentication protocols to sign a commercial credit extension of this magnitude remotely. The bank required the guarantor to receive a secure access code via text message or email. I checked the routing details for the security code. The access link had not been sent to my corporate email or my personal cell phone. The audit trail showed the secure link had been routed to an email address I had never seen before. It was a generic email account, a crude amalgamation of my first initial and last name, followed by a string of random numbers. They had created a burner email address specifically to intercept the bank's security protocols. My eyes moved to the bottom of the audit trail, where the witness verifications were logged. This was the most damning piece of the puzzle. Commercial lending laws dictate that if a guarantor cannot be physically present at a bank branch to sign for a massive credit increase, independent witnesses must verify the signer's identity. These witnesses are required to upload digital copies of their government-issued identification to the portal. I opened the attached verification files. They're rendered in high-resolution scans, where my parents' state-issued driver licenses. Patricia's smiling face looked back at me from the screen, perfectly coiffed and utterly devoid of guilt. Richard's stern, authoritative portrait sat right beside hers. They had scanned their own identification cards. They had checked the digital boxes, legally swearing under penalty of perjury that Clara Collins was physically present in the room with them. They had legally attested that they watched me review the loan terms, agree to the liability, and sign the document. The timestamp on their witness verification was from exactly 2 weeks ago, on a Tuesday at 2:15 in the afternoon. I pulled up my own work calendar on my left monitor. On that exact Tuesday at that exact time, I had been sitting in a glass-walled conference room in Manhattan, leading a quarterly portfolio review for a board of directors. I had 14 high-net-worth clients and 3 junior analysts in that room with me. I had an airtight, undeniable alibi, proving I was hundreds of miles away when my parents swore to a bank that I was sitting in their Connecticut home office, signing away for my financial future. The sheer mechanics of their betrayal were staggering. This was not a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a premeditated, coordinated conspiracy. They had to sit down together, formulate a plan, create a fake email address, route the bank documents to it, fake my signature, and then willingly upload their own identification to legitimize the fraud. And they did all of this to save Jamal. My father, a man who constantly preached about traditional values and financial responsibility, had committed a federal felony to bail out his unemployed son-in-law's cryptocurrency gambling debts. My mother, who spent every family gathering lecturing me about my lack of a husband and my rigid dedication to my career, had weaponized my identity to keep her golden child's fake public relations agency afloat. They had looked at the $100,000 shortfall created by Jamal's catastrophic financial incompetence. They had looked at the potential collapse of Brittany's fake CEO lifestyle, and they had made a conscious, calculated decision to throw my life straight into the fire to keep themselves warm. I took screenshots of the geolocation data, the burner email routing, and the uploaded copies of my parents' driver licenses. I saved everything into the digital prosecution packet on my secure hard drive. I now possessed concrete proof of federal wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The bank would not just close the account, they would refer the case to federal investigators. The legal consequences would be absolutely catastrophic for all 4 of them. I picked up my phone, opened a new email draft to David, and attached the compressed file. I typed a brief message: "The audit is complete. They forged my signature, and my parents acted as legal witnesses. Review the file. I want to proceed with full legal and criminal action." I hit send. The electronic swoosh of the outgoing email felt like the slamming of a vault door. My desk phone rang less than 5 minutes later. It was David. He did not bother with a polite greeting. "I am looking at the files right now," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "You have them dead to rights. This is a textbook case of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The fact that your parents notarized the digital envelope elevates this to a conspiracy charge. They are looking at mandatory minimums. If the bank decides to push this to the federal authorities." I kept my eyes on the Manhattan skyline. "I know," I replied. "What is our next move?" "We need to build an impenetrable wall of data," David instructed. "Right now, your sister and her husband are panicking because the credit line is frozen. They think this is just you being petty about a birthday dinner, but Jamal claims to be a tech guy. The moment he realizes that you might be looking at the commercial loan addendums, his first instinct will be to scrub their digital footprint. He will try to delete the agency email accounts, wipe the cloud drives, and destroy any communication that links him to the forged document. We cannot let that happen. I need to scrape everything I said already, opening a new encrypted folder on my secure hard drive." "Exactly," David agreed. "I want you to download every single piece of data associated with Ascendancy public relations transaction histories, IP logs, metadata, monthly statements, and every email thread you have ever shared with them regarding this account. Do not leave a single pixel uncopied. I am drafting a formal preservation of evidence letter to the bank's fraud department. We will force a server-side lock on their end, but I want our own pristine copies before the bank's automated systems trigger any alerts to your family. I ended the call and immediately went to work. The adrenaline that had been surging through my veins settled into a cold, hyper-focused energy. I navigated away from the commercial banking portal and logged into the secondary administrative dashboard. Because I was the primary guarantor, my credentials gave me root access to the account management settings. I started with the most vulnerable data. I accessed the linked communication logs between the bank and Brittany's fake agency. I exported the entire message history into a secure timestamped file. I captured the exact emails where the bank had requested the guarantor verification and the subsequent replies from the burner email address my parents had set up. I downloaded the metadata for those specific emails, capturing the routing information that proved they were sent from the Connecticut household. Next, I moved to the transaction history. I had already pulled the basic spreadsheet, but I needed the granular merchant data. I executed a batch download of every individual receipt, invoice, and transfer confirmation for the past 2 years. I specifically targeted the offshore wire transfers to Jamal's cryptocurrency exchange. I pulled the SWIFT confirmation numbers, the receiving wallet addresses, and the exact exchange rates at the time of the transfers. I mapped the decentralized wallets he used, noting the public ledger transactions that matched the bank outflow. I needed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that these were personal gambling expenditures and not legitimate corporate investments. Then I turned my attention to their public facade. I opened a new browser window and went to the official website for Ascendancy Public Relations. It was a glossy template-based site filled with stock photos and meaningless corporate jargon. I used a web archiving tool to capture the entire site structure, preserving the source code and the exact layout. I took high-resolution screenshots of their team page, where Brittany listed herself as Chief Executive Officer and Jamal as Chief Strategy Officer. They had proudly claimed those titles to impress their friends. Now those titles legally established their liability as corporate officers committing fraud. I moved on to their social media accounts. I spent the next hour systematically archiving every post story and tagged photo that contradicted their financial reality. I captured the images of my mother sipping champagne in the Hamptons, the video of Jamal flaunting the $28, Zunes and Rolex, and the posts bragging about their fake business meetings at Michelin-starred restaurants. I cross-referenced each social media post with the exact date and time of the fraudulent bank charges. I was building an irrefutable timeline of theft and deception. As I compiled the data, my phone remained silent. I had temporarily blocked their numbers to focus on the task, but I knew the silence would not last. They were currently stranded at a luxury resort with a declined corporate card. They had no way to pay for their opulent weekend, and they were completely cut off from their primary funding source. Desperation was a powerful motivator, and people like my family did not handle desperation with grace. I transferred all the collected evidence onto 3 separate encrypted flash drives. I kept one in my office safe, prepared one to be couriered directly to David's law firm, and slipped the third into my personal handbag. I took no chances. I had witnessed my family rewrite history and manipulate the truth for my entire life. They were masters of denial and deflection, but they could not gaslight a hard drive full of federal banking records. I felt a profound sense of closure. The family that had abandoned me at a rented lake house on my birthday was about to experience a profound sense of abandonment by the banking system they had exploited. I picked up my desk phone and dialed David back. "The data is secured," I reported. "I have the entire transactional history, the metadata for the forged documents, the offshore wire confirmations, and a complete archive of their public social media posts tying the stolen funds to their personal expenses. It is all encrypted, and I am sending a physical copy to your office via secure courier now." "Excellent work," Clara David said, his tone reflecting genuine professional respect. "I am submitting the fraud packet to the bank's legal division by close of business today. Once they review this, They will formally freeze the account from their end and initiate a federal investigation, but you need to be prepared for the immediate fallout. What do you mean? I asked. Your family is not going to just sit quietly in the Hamptons and accept this, David warned. When the hotel demands payment and they realize they are completely locked out of the funds, they will panic. They will not wait for a phone call or an email. They will try to corner you. They will try to force you to comply using whatever leverage they think they have left. You need to be ready for a physical confrontation. They will come to your home, or worse, they will come to your office. I looked at the heavy wooden door of my executive suite. I had spent years building my reputation in this firm. My family had always viewed my career as a boring desk job, a secondary consideration to their glamorous fake lifestyles. They had no respect for my professional boundaries. And David was absolutely right. They would not hesitate to bring their toxic drama directly to my workplace if they thought it would give them an advantage. Let them come, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. I have security protocols in place, and I am not hiding from them anymore. I have everything I need. I ended the call and locked my computer screen. The trap was fully armed, the evidence was secured, and the inescapable weight of federal law was about to crash down on their perfect fraudulent world. All I had to do now was wait for them to make their next desperate, foolish mistake. I did not have to wait long. Less than 20 minutes after I secured the encrypted files and locked my workist, the blinking red light of my desk phone shattered the quiet of my office. It was the private extension from the main reception desk downstairs. I picked up the receiver. Clara Collins speaking, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. Ms. Collins, I am so sorry to interrupt your afternoon, the receptionist stammered. Her voice was trembling, entirely, stripped of its usual polished corporate warmth. There are 3 individuals in the main lobby. They bypassed the initial security checkpoint downstairs by tailgating a group of executives. They are demanding to see you immediately. One of them is a woman who claims to be your mother, and she is becoming extremely loud. I could hear the shrill, chaotic echoes of Patricia's voice bleeding through the phone line. She was shrieking something about an emergency and demanding that someone fetch her ungrateful daughter. The collision of my toxic family dynamic with my strictly controlled professional sanctuary had officially occurred. Alert the head of building security. I instructed the receptionist calmly. Tell them to dispatch 2 guards to the lobby, but order them to stand by and observe. They are not to engage physically unless I give a direct signal. I am coming down now. I placed the receiver back on its cradle. I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my tailored navy blazer, and walked out of my office. The elevator ride down to the ground floor took exactly 45 seconds. I used that time to slow my breathing and lock my emotions behind a wall of absolute ice. I knew exactly what they wanted. At exactly 12:03 on Christmas morning, my phone lit up on the desk beside my coffee. My daughter's voice was shaking so badly, I almost didn't recognize it. Mom, why did the Pentagon just call Dad? I stopped breathing for a second. The operation center around me kept humming like nothing had happened. The radios crackled. Someone laughed at the far end of the room. A wall of monitors tracked weather across the southeast. I looked at the clock again. 12:03 a.m., Christmas Day. There are certain phone calls you never forget. That one joined the list. But to explain why my daughter was crying in the middle of the night, I have to go back 3 days. My name is Linda Carter. I'm 58 years old, and after 24 years in Army logistics, I took a civilian job coordinating emergency operations at Fort Liberty, North Carolina. It isn't glamorous work, but it matters. When storms hit, when equipment has to move, when people need answers, somebody has to keep the gears turning. Most days that somebody is me. My apartment sits about 15 minutes outside the post in a quiet neighborhood where retired soldiers seem to outnumber everyone else. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, beige carpet, a tiny balcony overlooking a parking lot, and a fake Christmas tree I've been setting up every December since 2014. The tree leans a little to the left. So do I, these days. I'd finished decorating it on December 22nd. White lights, a few wooden ornaments Emily made in elementary school, One tiny brass angel my mother bought before she passed away. Simple. That was enough. I'd just settled into my recliner with a mug of coffee when my cell phone rang. Emily. I smiled before answering. Well, look who's calling her old mom. She laughed, but it sounded forced. Hi, Mom. You done with your shopping yet? Almost. There was a pause, the kind that tells you somebody is trying to find the least painful way to hurt you. I knew that pause. I'd lived through enough military casualty notifications to recognize hesitation before bad news. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, another silence, then she finally said it. So, Dad and Melissa are hosting Christmas this year, I know, and Melissa's parents are flying in. That's nice. Another pause. We really want her to feel like she's part of the family. I stared at the little angel hanging on my tree. I see. Emily rushed the next sentence. It'll just be easier if it's, immediate family. Immediate family. Funny how a daughter can say two ordinary words that somehow erase 34 years of motherhood. She wasn't trying to be cruel. That almost made it worse. I looked out the window at the parking lot. Somebody was loading groceries into a silver Ford Explorer, while Christmas music drifted from another apartment. Life just kept moving. I understand, I said quietly. You do, I do. You aren't upset. Oh, honey. I smiled even though she couldn't see it. I've had worse Christmases. That part wasn't a lie. I'd spent one Christmas sleeping inside a canvas tent in Kuwait, another eating powdered mashed potatoes in Afghanistan. Compared to those years, sitting alone in North Carolina didn't seem like much. Emily sounded relieved. Thanks, Mom. I hope everybody has a nice time. We will. We talked another 5 minutes about work traffic and whether she'd finally replace her aging Keurig. Neither of us mentioned Christmas again. After we hung up, I sat there a long time without drinking my coffee. It had gone cold. The next morning, I drove through the gates at Fort Liberty before sunrise. The MPs waved me through. Same routine, same roads, same rows of brick buildings I'd been driving past for years. Inside the Emergency Operations Center, holiday staffing was posted on the whiteboard. Several names still had question marks beside them. Nobody likes working Christmas, especially the younger folks with little kids. I walked into my supervisor's office. Mark Reynolds looked up from his computer. Morning, Linda. You still short on Christmas coverage? He leaned back. Actually, yeah, I'll take it. You sure? Positive? He frowned. You worked Thanksgiving. I know, you don't have family plans. I smiled. They changed. He didn't ask another question. Military people learn when not to. By lunchtime, everybody knew I'd volunteered. Specialist Jordan Ellis looked genuinely confused. Ma'am, you don't mind giving up Christmas? I shrugged. Somebody's got to answer the phones. He laughed. My wife would never forgive me, then don't volunteer. Around the office, people traded stories about wrapping presents, burnt pies, impossible in-laws, and toddlers waking everybody before daylight. I smiled at the right places, joined the conversations. Even laughed when one young captain admitted he'd accidentally bought his wife the exact same air fryer she bought him. Life has a funny way of reminding you that normal problems are actually blessings. That evening, I stopped by Harris Teeter for groceries. The checkout line stretched halfway down the aisles. A little boy in front of me kept begging his grandmother for candy. She finally sighed. Fine, one chocolate Santa. He celebrated like he'd won the lottery. I couldn't help smiling. Back home, I heated up tomato soup and watched an old Western on television. The apartment was quiet, not lonely exactly, just quiet. There's a difference. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. By 6 that evening, I was already inside the operations center. Someone had put a plastic wreath on the door. The cafeteria served turkey, stuffing green beans, and pumpkin pie on disposable trays. I sat alone near the window. Across the room, younger soldiers balanced paper plates while video chatting with their families. One little girl held her new teddy bear up to the camera. A soldier beside me laughed when his son proudly displayed mismatched Christmas pajamas. Those tiny moments made the room feel warmer. I finished my meal and carried my tray to the return window. Back upstairs, I settled into my workstation. Weather reports, staffing updates, routine maintenance requests, quiet. Just after 11:30, I poured myself another cup of coffee. Outside, Christmas lights blinked across the base housing area. Inside, The digital wall clock counted down another ordinary shift. Then my cell phone buzzed. Emily. I smiled, expecting a quick Merry Christmas. Instead, I answered to the sound of my daughter crying. Mom. I pushed my chair back so fast it rolled into the wall. Emily, what's wrong? She tried to speak, couldn't, then finally whispered the words that made every person in that room disappear from my mind. Mom, why did the Pentagon just call Dad? Everything changed in that moment. For a second, I forgot where I was. The operations center faded into the background. The computer monitors, the radios, the low hum of conversation, all of it disappeared behind the sound of Emily trying to catch her breath. Emily, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. Slow down. Tell me exactly what happened. I don't know everything. Start with what you do know, she sniffled. We were opening presents early, because Melissa's parents wanted to leave first thing in the morning. Dad's phone rang around 11:30. He looked at the screen, and I've never seen his face go white like that. What did he do? He walked outside, and when he came back in, he said it was work. I frowned. My father hadn't worked for the Department of Defense in almost 10 years. He'd retired from civilian contracting after leaving active duty. There wasn't much reason for anyone at the Pentagon to be calling him on Christmas Eve. Then another call came, Emily continued. This time he answered in the kitchen. Melissa followed him. I reached for a notepad on my desk and started writing. Go on. I heard somebody say they needed to speak with both of them. Did they say why? No. What happened next? Emily let out a shaky breath. Dad started arguing. That got my attention. My ex-husband, David Carter, wasn't an emotional man. During our 26 years of marriage, I'd seen him raise his voice maybe 5 times. He believed problems were solved with lists, schedules, and checkbooks, not shouting. He kept saying there had to be some mistake, Emily said. And Melissa, she locked herself in the guest bedroom. I blinked. Locked herself in? She wouldn't come out. What about her parents? They had no idea what was going on. They just sat there staring at each other. I glanced at the wall clock. 12:08. Then what? Emily lowered her voice. About 20 minutes later, 2 government cars pulled into the neighborhood. My pen stopped moving. Government cars? I think so. Black SUVs. Did they come to the house? Yes. Did they come inside? They talked to Dad on the front porch. For how long? I don't know, maybe 15 minutes. I leaned back in my chair. None of this made sense. David wasn't the kind of man who got into trouble. In fact, one of the biggest reasons our marriage fell apart was because he hated taking risks. Everything had to be planned. Vacations, budgets, even grocery shopping. If milk wasn't on the list, we weren't buying milk. The idea of investigators showing up at his front door sounded almost impossible. Emily spoke again. Mom, I'm here. They kept asking about military records. I looked down at my notes. Military records? They also wanted Melissa. That landed even harder. Melissa? Yes. What does Melissa have to do with military records? I don't know. Neither did I. I'd met Melissa exactly 4 times. She was pleasant enough, always smiling, always calling everyone sweetheart. She taught 3rd grade outside Charlotte and liked posting photos of homemade desserts on Facebook. Nothing about her suggested federal investigators. Nothing. You don't think Dad's in trouble, do you? Emily asked. I don't know yet. I've been calling him for 20 minutes. He won't answer. Where is he now? I have no idea. I looked over at my supervisor's office. Mark was finishing paperwork. He caught my eye and immediately knew something was wrong. I held up one finger. Just a minute. Emily, are you safe? Yes. Is Melissa still there? I think so. You think I left? You left the house? I couldn't stay. Where are you? At Lauren's apartment. I recognized the name. Lauren had been Emily's college roommate. Good. I didn't know who else to call. That sentence hit me harder than the rest. For the first time in years, when everything fell apart, my daughter called me first. Not her father. Me. I need you to stay where you are, I said. Lock the door if you're alone. Okay. I'm going to head your way. You are? Yes, it's Christmas, I noticed. Despite everything, she let out a weak laugh. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it was enough. I stood up and walked toward Mark's office. He took one look at my face. Family emergency, I think. So, go, I'll owe you. You've covered enough holidays for everybody else. I grabbed my coat from the back of my chair. One of the younger specialists called after me. Merry Christmas, Miss Carter. I smiled without turning around. You too. The air outside was cold enough to sting. My pickup, a 12-year-old blue Ford F-150, started on the second try. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward Interstate 95 before cutting west. The roads were almost empty. Most people were asleep or sitting around living rooms, putting together bicycles and dollhouses. My headlights stretched across miles of dark highway. Every now and then, I'd pass a Waffle House, glowing like a lighthouse in the night. Open, always open. About 40 minutes into the drive, Emily called again. Any news? No. Have you heard from your dad? Nothing. What about Melissa? No, she hesitated. Mom? Yes. I feel awful. Why? Because I told you not to come. I tightened my hands on the steering wheel. Emily, no. I need to say it. She took a deep breath. I thought I was doing the right thing. I know. I didn't want Melissa to feel uncomfortable. I understand. I didn't think. Her voice cracked again. I didn't think I'd end up wishing you were there. I swallowed hard. For years after the divorce, I'd imagined hearing those words. Now that they had finally come, they didn't feel like victory. They just felt sad. I've made plenty of mistakes too, I said. We're not talking about you. No, we're talking about family. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. The tires hummed against the pavement. Finally, Emily asked, "Do you think Dad lied to us?" I don't know. And Melissa, I don't know that either. The truth was, my mind kept circling one question. Why would anyone from the Pentagon care about my ex-husband's wife? Melissa had never served. As far as I knew, nobody in her immediate family had either. The pieces simply didn't fit. Around 1:45 in the morning, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered through the truck's speaker. This is Linda Carter. A calm male voice replied. Miss Carter, my name is Special Agent Brian Holloway. My stomach tightened. I'm with the Department of Defense. I pulled into a rest area without even thinking. How can I help you? We understand you're the former spouse of David Carter. That's right. We'd appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. About what? There was a brief pause. I'm afraid I can't discuss the details over the phone. Is David under arrest? I can't answer that. Is my daughter in danger? No, ma'am. That answer came quickly. It sounded honest. I'll be in Charlotte within 2 hours. We'll arrange a meeting after you arrive. He gave me a phone number. I wrote it on the back of a gas receipt. Then the call ended. I sat there, staring through the windshield. The parking lot was empty except for one 18-wheeler in an RV, with Christmas lights still glowing around its windows. Something wasn't right. This wasn't about one unexpected phone call anymore. This was bigger, much bigger, and whatever waited for me in Charlotte was about to change far more than one family's Christmas. I reached Charlotte a little after 4:30 in the morning. The city was quiet in that strange way only Christmas morning can be. Traffic lights changed for cars that weren't there. Fast food signs glowed over empty parking lots. A few people walked, dogs bundled up in winter coats, while the rest of the neighborhood slept. Emily met me outside Lauren's apartment building. The second she saw my truck, she ran across the parking lot. She hadn't done that since she was a teenager. The moment she climbed into the passenger seat, she wrapped both arms around me. I'm sorry, she whispered. I held her for a few seconds without saying anything. Some conversations can wait. That hug couldn't. When she finally leaned back, I noticed she still had yesterday's Christmas sweater on. Her mascara had run, and she'd been crying long enough that her eyes were swollen. You eating anything? I asked. She shook her head. I wasn't hungry. Well, I am. She looked surprised. I smiled a little. If we're about to deal with the federal government, I'm not doing it on an empty stomach. That earned the first real smile I'd seen from her all night. We found an old 24-hour diner a few miles away that was still serving breakfast. The place had maybe 6 customers, mostly truck drivers, and a couple of police officers finishing the night shift. The waitress poured coffee without asking. You two look like you've had a rough night. You could say that, I answered. Emily picked at her scrambled eggs while I watched the front window. At exactly 6:05, my phone rang. Special Agent Brian Holloway. We're ready whenever you are, Miss Carter. He gave me an address. It wasn't a police station. It was a federal office building just outside downtown Charlotte. 20 minutes later, Emily and I walked through a metal detector and into a conference room with beige walls, a long table, and coffee that smelled like it had been sitting there since yesterday. Agent Holloway looked to be in his mid-40s. Neat haircut, dark suit, calm voice. Another woman sat beside him. "I'm Special Agent Karen Doyle." We shook hands. Holloway waited until everyone sat down. "Miss Carter, thank you for coming. I'd rather know why I'm here." "I understand." He opened a thick folder. "We're investigating fraudulent claims involving military survivor benefits." I frowned. "I'm not following." "We believe your former husband's current wife, Melissa Carter, falsely represented herself for several years as the surviving spouse of a deceased service member. For a second, I honestly thought I'd heard him wrong." "I'm sorry." "What?" He repeated it almost word for word. I stared at him. "Melissa wasn't married before David." "Correct, so how could she claim to be someone's widow?" "Through forged documentation," Emily gasped. "No." Agent Doyle slid several copies of paperwork across the table. Names, benefit forms, copies of identification, photographs. One picture showed Melissa standing beside a memorial display at a charity event, wearing a black dress and a small pin with a gold star. Another showed her speaking at what looked like a veterans fundraiser. "I've never seen these," Emily whispered. "Neither had I." Holloway folded his hands. "Over the last 4 years, Ms. Arnott had multiple events identifying herself as the widow of a soldier killed overseas. But she isn't." "No. Then why would anyone believe her?" "Because she had convincing documents." He tapped the folder. "Documents we now know were falsified." I felt my stomach tighten. I'd spent nearly half my life around military families. I'd attended memorial services. I'd stood beside wives who received folded American flags. I'd watched children ask questions no child should ever have to ask. Pretending to belong to that community wasn't just dishonest. It was personal. Emily covered her mouth. "Oh my God." "There is more," Doyle said quietly. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. "The investigation indicates your former husband became aware of the fraud approximately 2 years ago." Emily looked up so fast her chair squeaked. "What?" "He knew. We have evidence suggesting he did." "No," she shook her head over and over. "No, he wouldn't." Agent Holloway didn't interrupt. He simply placed another document on the table, a series of emails. One message from David read, "We need to stop using that story. Somebody's eventually going to ask questions," Melissa had replied. "They never do." Another message, "As long as paperwork matches, we're fine." Emily pushed the papers away. "I don't want to read anymore." Neither did I, but I forced myself to. Years in the Army had taught me something important. Facts don't become less true because they're painful. "We're trying to understand how much Mr. Carter knew," Holloway said. "Were they collecting money?" I asked, among other things. He explained that Melissa had accepted speaking honorariums, charitable donations, travel reimbursements, and special assistance programs intended for Gold Star families. She'd also received discounts from businesses that wanted to honor military survivors. Each individual amount wasn't enormous. Together, they added up to tens of thousands of dollars. Meaty Emily buried her face in her hands. "My dad helped hide this. We're still determining exactly what role he played." I leaned back in my chair. The room suddenly felt much smaller. My marriage hadn't ended because David was dishonest. It had ended because we grew into different people. I'd always respected one thing about him, his integrity. Me now, even that was cracking. As we left the conference room, another man walked past wearing an old army jacket. He noticed the paperwork tucked under Holloway's arm. Without knowing any details, he muttered under his breath, "Every year, somebody tries to wear a uniform they never earned." His words stayed with me. Outside, Emily finally asked the question we'd both been avoiding. "What happens now?" "I don't know." She looked at me with tears forming again. "Mom," clears throat, "Yeah, if this all comes out, everybody's going to know." She wasn't worried about gossip. She was worried about losing the father she'd believed she knew. I understood because I was quietly grieving the same thing. That afternoon, I drove past David's subdivision. News vans hadn't arrived yet. The street looked perfectly ordinary. Kids rode bicycles. Neighbors waved at each other. Christmas decorations still hung from porches. Behind one of those front doors, an entire life was falling apart, and almost nobody knew it. I could have driven away. Part of me wanted to. After all, David wasn't my clear's throat responsibility anymore. Melissa certainly wasn't. I could have told the investigators I didn't know anything and gone back to Fort Liberty. Instead, I sat in the truck for nearly 15 minutes thinking, wondering whether opening old wounds was worth it, whether exposing the truth would only hurt Emily more. Then my phone buzzed. It was Agent Holloway. "Miss Carter, we've identified several military charity events where you may recognize people involved." I closed my eyes. Those weren't just names on a list. Many of them were people I'd worked beside. People who had trusted someone wearing a borrowed story. I finally answered, "I'll help." Even as the words left my mouth, I knew helping would come with a price. The hardest part wasn't going to be proving what Melissa had done. It was accepting that the man I'd spent half my life with might have chosen a lie over the values he once taught our daughter. And that truth hurt more than I expected. I thought the hardest part would be sitting across from federal investigators. I was wrong. The hardest part was going home and pretending everything still felt normal. 3 days after Christmas, I was back at Fort Liberty answering emails, reviewing supply requests, and approving emergency staffing schedules. The coffee tasted the same, the fluorescent lights buzzed the same way they always had. Outside my office window, soldiers hurried across the parking lot with backpacks slung over their shoulders. Life kept moving. Mine just happened to be carrying around a secret. Agent Holloway had warned me that investigations like this didn't wrap up in a week. They took time. "Facts first," he told me during one of our phone calls. "Opinions can wait." I liked that. It reminded me of something an old command sergeant major used to say: "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast." So instead of chasing rumors, I started with what I actually knew. I pulled out old address books I'd never thrown away. Retirement ceremony programs, Christmas cards from military families, contact lists from charity events I'd helped organize years earlier. One name led to another. Some people remembered Melissa immediately. Others didn't remember her at all until I mentioned a fundraiser or banquet. One afternoon, I drove to Fayetteville to meet my old friend Denise Walker for lunch. Denise had retired from Army finance before I did. If anyone understood military benefits, it was her. She slid into the booth carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You sounded serious on the phone." "I am." I carefully explained only what Agent Holloway had authorized me to discuss. Denise listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back. "I remember her." "You do barely. From where?" "A military appreciation dinner in Raleigh." "What stood out?" Denise frowned. She kept telling people her husband died overseas. I nodded. "Did anyone question her?" "No. Why not?" Denise looked at me like the answer should have been obvious. "Because decent people don't assume someone would lie about something like that." That sentence stayed with me the rest of the day. Read decent people, don't expect cruelty dressed up as grief. Over the next 2 weeks, I met with 4 more former coworkers. Each conversation added another small piece. Nobody had seen the whole picture. One volunteer remembered Melissa collecting donations. Another remembered introducing her as a Gold Star widow during a community event. Someone else recalled David quietly standing beside her, smiling politely while she thanked people for supporting families like ours. Every story sounded harmless by itself. Together they painted something entirely different. Agent Holloway called me every few days. "We're making progress." "Good. We've confirmed several financial records." "What about David?" A pause. "We're still sorting that out." That answer never changed. Meanwhile, word began spreading around Charlotte. Not the facts, the rumors. By the second week of January, people had invented stories that sounded like bad television plots. Someone claimed David had stolen classified documents. Another insisted Melissa had been a foreign spy. One ridiculous rumor said investigators found hidden cash buried in the backyard. None of it was true. The real story was quieter and somehow sadder. Then the whispers turned toward me. Emily called one evening after work. "Mom, I can hear it in your voice." She sighed. "I ran into Dad's neighbor today, and she said people think you're behind all this." I didn't answer right away. Emily continued. "They're saying you're just trying to get revenge, because Dad remarried." I looked out my apartment window. Rain slid slowly down the glass. I wondered how long it would take. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not. Whenever people don't know the truth, they usually choose the simplest explanation. The bitter ex-wife made an easy villain. I told her she was wrong. Thank you. But I waited. I think Dad believes it too. That hurt. Not because David blamed me. Because after 30 years together, he should have known better. The next morning, I found an envelope tucked under my office door. No return address. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper. One sentence: some families deserve to stay buried. No signature, no threat, just that. I showed it to base security anyway. They documented it and advised me not to worry unless more appeared. Still, I locked my apartment door twice that night. A week later, Agent Holloway asked if I'd be willing to review photographs from several veterans' events. Most were ordinary banquet pictures. People shaking hands, smiling, holding certificates. Then I stopped at one photo. There. Holloway looked over my shoulder. What caught your attention? The woman beside Melissa. Do you know her? Yes, her name was Carol Simmons. Her son Jason had actually been killed while serving overseas. I'd attended his memorial service. I'd watched Carol accept the folded flag. If Melissa stood beside Carol pretending to share the same loss, I couldn't finish the thought. Holloway quietly wrote down Carol's name. A few days later he called back. You were right. What happened? Mrs. Simmons believed Melissa was a fellow Gold Star spouse. I closed my eyes, so she trusted her. Yes. And Melissa let her. Yes. For the first time since this nightmare began, anger pushed past the sadness. Not loud anger, cold anger, the kind that settles in your chest and refuses to leave. A few evenings later, I attended a monthly breakfast at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall, where several old friends gathered. I hadn't planned to mention the investigation, but retired Colonel Frank Delaney pulled me aside before I could leave. I've been hearing things. I'm sure you have. He studied my face. You look tired. I am. He nodded toward two empty chairs. Sit. Frank had always spoken like he had nowhere else to be. Sometimes that alone made people tell the truth. After listening quietly, he stirred his coffee. You know what's bothering you? I can think of several things. You still feel responsible for protecting your daughter's relationship with her father. He wasn't wrong. I don't want to destroy what's left. You aren't. I might. No. He shook his head gently. The person who tells the truth isn't the one who breaks trust. I looked down at my coffee. What if Emily never forgives me? Then give her time. He smiled. Truth doesn't get louder because you yell. I recognized the line immediately. It gets stronger with evidence. He laughed. Looks like somebody else taught you that before I did. Driving home, I kept replaying those words. For weeks, I'd been asking myself whether helping the investigation made me vindictive, whether somewhere deep down I wanted David to suffer. The honest answer surprised me. I didn't. I wanted the pretending to stop. I wanted people like Carol Simmons to never again wonder if the stranger hugging them at a memorial service had earned the right to stand there. The revenge I thought I wanted was slowly changing into something else. Not payback, accountability. Still, I knew the hardest days were ahead, because evidence doesn't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, every document, every email, every witness statement would leave the investigators' folders and enter a courtroom. And when that happened, there would be no more hiding behind rumors. Only the truth, however painful it turned out to be. By the time spring arrived, the investigation was no longer a secret. It hadn't become front-page national news, but around Charlotte and the military communities nearby. People were talking. Most of them still didn't know the full story. They knew there was an investigation involving military benefits, a local charity, and a couple everyone thought they knew. The federal prosecutor called me on a Tuesday afternoon. We're ready to move forward. I had known that call was coming. Still hearing the words made my stomach tighten. A hearing was scheduled at the federal courthouse in Charlotte. It wouldn't be a dramatic television courtroom with surprise witnesses and shouted objections. Most real courtrooms aren't like that. They move methodically, one piece of evidence at a time. Sometimes that's even more powerful. Emily called me the night before. I don't know if I can go. You don't have to, but if I don't, she stopped. If you don't, you'll always wonder, she sighed. I hate that you're right. I don't enjoy being right. That made her laugh just for a second. I'll meet you there. The courthouse was already busy when I arrived. Veterans in jackets covered with service patches stood quietly in small groups outside the entrance. A few reporters waited behind metal barricades. Television cameras were pointed toward the front steps, hoping someone would say something dramatic. Nobody did. David arrived with his attorney. For the first time in months, I saw my former husband face to face. He looked older, not because of gray hair, because he'd started carrying himself like a man who hadn't slept well in a very long time. Our eyes met for only a moment. Neither of us waved. Melissa walked several steps behind him. Gone was the cheerful woman who used to post smiling holiday photos online. She looked exhausted. No makeup, shoulders slumped. She kept staring at the ground as photographers called her name. Inside the courtroom, everything felt surprisingly ordinary. Wooden benches, American flag,